If my mother weren't here, today would surely be much more perfect. Thomas said those words in the luxurious hall, right after he took Rachel's hand and they walked onto the stage at their lavish wedding. All the lights shone directly on the newlyweds. The soft music had just faded, leaving a tense, suffocating silence. I, Evelyn, sat in a small corner at the back of the hall. In my hands at that moment wasn't a glass of champagne like the other guests, but the plastic milk bottle of my 2-year-old grandchild. Around me were 12 grandchildren, both paternal and maternal, of all ages, from those who could run and jump to those who still needed to be held. They clung to my skirt, crying for food, for the bathroom, for playtime. All day, I was like an unpaid nanny, while my son and daughter-in-law laughed, danced, and toasted amidst applause. I didn't complain, for I was used to sacrificing, but those words, they were like a knife twisting in my chest. I looked up, staring directly at my son. Thomas wasn't embarrassed at all. On the contrary, he even smiled, a proud, challenging smile. Rachel, standing beside him, leaned closer to the microphone and added a venomous jest. That's right. If the mother-in-law knew how to keep her distance, we wouldn't have had to bother with so many troublesome things. The entire hall fell silent. I saw a few awkward glances, a few whispers. My heart pounded. Heat rushed to my face. After so many years of dedicating my entire life to raising my son, nurturing him from nothing to a grown man, in that moment I was merely a burden, a stain in his eyes. I stood up. Clutching my handbag tightly, ushering the children along, I left. Amidst the murmuring and the following glances, I clearly heard one thing: Thomas's silence, the silence of accepting the humiliation of his own mother in front of hundreds of people, and in that very moment, I swore, things would never be the same again. I walked out of the magnificent reception hall, leaving behind the cheerful wedding music and the unwitting laughter. The door closed, but in my heart, another door had opened, a door leading to the abyss of betrayed trust. The youngest grandchild cried, clinging to my neck. Sweat broke out on my forehead, but a chill ran down my spine. For years, I had believed Thomas was the only son I could trust. I sacrificed my youth, my health, even my personal happiness for his future. Yet today, on his most important day, he used his own words to cast me into the depths of shame. Does anyone understand that feeling? Sitting alone in a crowd, taking care of 12 grandchildren, while hearing your son regard you as a thorn in his side. I swallowed my tears, but every word Thomas spoke echoed in my head. If my mother weren't here, today would surely be much more perfect. I didn't know what everyone was thinking. Perhaps they found it amusing. Perhaps they were too embarrassed to speak up. But I understood one thing clearly. From that moment on, Thomas and Rachel no longer considered me family. I was just a shadow, a free babysitter, an old woman they could dismiss at any time. I quietly led the children to the parking lot, ignoring the curious stares from behind. In my mind, a cold vow echoed. If they want to treat me as invisible, then I will show them my true worth. And when that time comes, they will pay the price. That night, as I held my grandchildren sleeping on the cramped sofa, I knew a storm was brewing, and this time I would not remain silent. My name is Evelyn. I am 65 years old. If anyone were to ask about my life, it could probably be summarized in 2 words: sacrifice. I once had a small, happy family. My husband, David, was a diligent worker who loved his wife and child dearly, but fate was too cruel. A car accident when Thomas was just 10 years old took him away, leaving me alone with the responsibility of raising our only son. I remember that night vividly, holding Thomas in my arms, hearing him sob, "Mom, from now on, it's just going to be you and me, right?" I swallowed my tears, pursed my lips tightly, and nodded. And I swore, No matter what, my child would never go without. From then on, I did everything to raise Thomas. By day, I cleaned rooms at the hotel, and by night, I took on sewing and laundry jobs to earn extra money. There were days my hands bled from scrubbing floors with a brush, yet the next morning, I still had to smile and encourage my son. "Study hard, my dear. Once you become a good person, I can rest easy." Thomas was a good boy when he was young. I still remember the image of him holding an old notebook, diligently studying under the lamplight when the electricity was out. One day he looked up, his eyes sparkling, and whispered, "When I grow up, I'll get a good job and buy a big house for Mom to live in." I promise. That promise gave me the strength to get through those difficult times. I believed that all sacrifices would eventually be rewarded, that my son would become my rock in my old age. However, as Thomas grew older, he changed. First came the distance. Hugs and heart-to-heart talks became fewer. Then, when he started working, making friends and having a girlfriend, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, but I didn't resent it. I told myself, he has his own family, his own life, and that's good. I just needed to be there to help with chores and take care of small things. I thought motherly love would always remain strong, unshakable. Little did I know, that was when the real tragedy began. Thomas's childhood years were a treasure trove of memories for me. I remember cold winter mornings, the two of us huddled together under one old coat. I would pack him a small bread roll, sometimes just with a thin spread of margarine. He'd take a bite and then offer it back to me, innocently saying, "Mom, you eat. I'm full." Those words made my heart ache. He didn't know I was saving my share for him. I quickly swallowed my tears, patted his head, and whispered, "Eat it all, dear. I'll eat later." There were evenings when heavy rain poured down on our small, dilapidated house. I'd spread a torn raincoat to cover where he slept, while I bore the cold drips on my back. Yet Thomas slept soundly, his breathing even, a faint smile on his lips. Seeing him sleep, I felt that all hardship was worth it. The day Thomas got into university, I cried like I had never cried before. I stood in the middle of the schoolyard, hugging him, crying and laughing. "You did it! I'm so proud of you." Thomas squeezed my hand tightly, his eyes shining. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll give you a happy life someday." I etched that promise deep in my heart, cherishing it like a precious treasure. I believed that all my sacrifices had finally paid off, but as time passed, everything changed. On the day Thomas married Rachel, I smiled and offered my blessings, though my heart was uneasy. Rachel never truly liked me. Her gaze towards me was calculating, as if I were just a free housekeeper for their new family. I thought perhaps it was just a mother's sensitivity. I reassured myself, never mind, as long as my son is happy. Little did I know, from the moment Thomas got married, his so-called happiness was built upon my continued blind sacrifices, a cycle, but this time even more bitter. And then, that fateful day, their official wedding day, everything exploded. If young Thomas was once the only hope that kept me alive after my loss, then, as an adult, he became the deepest pain of my life. I remember once, when he was small, he was teased by friends as that orphan. He ran home, tears welling up, and threw himself into my arms. I stroked his hair and said, "It's okay, my darling. Mom is here now. As long as you have me, you'll never be alone." He buried his head in my shoulder, sniffling. "Then in the future, I won't let you be alone either. I promise." I believed that promise with all my heart, but it took 25 years for me to realize it was just a naive utterance that had long since vanished with time. When Thomas found stable employment, I thought life would become easier. But no, he gradually forgot the days when my son and I shared a slice of bread. I still cooked for them, washed clothes for my 12 grandchildren, and cleaned the house from morning till night. Yet, in my daughter-in-law's eyes, I was just a free old nanny. In my son's eyes, I was a burden that made him awkward in front of his friends. I began to feel invisible barriers forming. Words of thanks became scarce, warm glances disappeared, replaced by curt remarks and complaints. Whenever Rachel made a sarcastic comment, Thomas chose to remain silent. That silence stung 100 times more than any harsh words. I kept telling myself, never mind, he has his own family. As long as he's happy, that's all that matters. It's okay if I endure a little more hardship. But I was mistaken. My forbearance didn't bring Thomas happiness. It only turned me into a doormat for them to tread upon. And then, on his wedding day, when Thomas uttered, "If it weren't for you, today would be much more perfect," I finally came to my senses. All the beautiful memories, all the promises of yesteryear, all of it dissolved into thin air. In that moment, I understood. My life was about to enter a new chapter. No longer the silently sacrificing mother, but a woman ready to stand up, confront, and reclaim the respect that was rightfully hers. After that wedding, I thought things would settle down, that Thomas had just spoken impulsively in the heat of the moment. But I was wrong. That statement wasn't an accident. It was the harsh truth he had been hiding all along. In the days following the wedding, I still stayed with Thomas and his wife to help care for the children. 12 grandchildren, a number that would exhaust any woman, but I cherished them as my own. They chirped Granny at me, clung to me, and cried to sleep with me. There were nights I stayed awake until dawn, trying to soothe 3 crying children at once. Yet the next morning, when Thomas left for work and Rachel went to a party, neither of them bothered to ask me, "Mom, are you tired?" Rachel began to openly show her disdain. She would often say to her friends, "It's such a relief to have Evelyn watching the kids. If I had to hire a nanny, I'd go bankrupt." On the surface, it sounded like gratitude, but her tone dripped with contempt. Every time I passed by, she'd give me a sideways glance, half joking, half serious. It's a good thing my mother-in-law still has the strength. What could she even do if she were old and frail? Those words pierced my heart. But what hurt more was that Thomas would just chuckle, never once stepping in to defend his mother. One evening, I remember it clearly. It was pouring rain. After I had bathed and fed each of the little ones, Rachel appeared, arms crossed, standing in the kitchen doorway. "I have a party tomorrow. You prepare everything. Don't let me be embarrassed because the children are messy." I looked up, my voice trembling. "But I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. The doctor said my heart needs monitoring." Rachel interrupted, her voice cold. "Then cancel it. Your mother's priority is to take care of her children and grandchildren. Leave the illness for later." I was stunned into silence. A sense of grievance welled up, choking me. I turned to look at Thomas, the son I had raised with every drop of my sweat and tears. He sat on the sofa, his eyes glued to his phone screen, as if he hadn't heard a word. That night, I lay curled up on the small bed next to the children's room. My heart pounded. I couldn't breathe, but tears flowed uncontrollably. I began to understand. I was no longer a mother, no longer family. I was just a shadow, a free babysitter for this family. And from that grievance, a simmering fire ignited. I knew, if I continued to remain silent, how much further they would look down on me. The harsh truth didn't stop at treating me like a nanny. One day, while cleaning the living room, I accidentally found a stack of papers that had fallen from Rachel's bag. It was a contract to buy a new villa, worth over $1.2 million. I was stunned into silence. Thousands of questions immediately flooded my mind. How could they afford such a large house? Where did the money come from? I knew Thomas's salary wasn't high, and Rachel only had a regular office job. Yet while I was drowning in hospital debt, carefully budgeting for medicine, they were secretly saving to buy a lavish home. I trembled, holding the papers, my heart racing. Just then, Thomas walked in. His eyes flickered with alarm when he saw me holding the stack of papers. He snatched them from my hand, his voice sharp. "Mom, don't go snooping through your son and daughter-in-law's things." I froze, stammering. You bought a new house without telling your mother? I've lived with you for years, I thought. Rachel walked in from outside, her eyes as cold as ice. This is a private matter for my husband and me. You don't need to interfere. Where you live and how you live, we'll figure that out later. Those words were like a slap in the face. I tried to keep my composure. But I gave you $50,000 of my savings last year to help you pay off debts. Where did that money go? The air grew thick. Thomas looked flustered, while Rachel let out a dry laugh. It went into this house, of course. Consider it your contribution to your grandchildren having a better place to live. I was dumbfounded. So the money I had saved my entire life, through sleepless nights, through exhausting manual labor, had become part of a villa I was never allowed to step foot in. I was no longer the owner, nor was I a guest. I was an outsider, exploited down to my last penny. That evening, I vaguely heard Thomas say to Rachel in their room, "Just let Mom stay and look after the child. We'll save a lot on a nanny. Besides, Mom is old now. What does she know?" Rachel replied with a disdainful tone, "Yeah, just don't let her think she still has a say in this house." I lay in the darkness, my pillow wet with tears. In my entire life, I never imagined a day would come when my own child would see me as a burden, a tool for profit. And from that moment, a thought sparked within me. Enough. I can't let them continue to look down on me and take advantage of me like this. Ever since I discovered the secret of the villa, Rachel's attitude became even more evident. If before she still maintained a minimum of politeness, now her sarcastic, biting words were like daggers stabbing directly into my heart. One afternoon, I was busy cooking dinner for the whole family, sweat soaking my back, when Rachel walked into the kitchen. She crossed her arms, her voice sweet but full of mockery. "Oh my God, the smell of grease all over the house. Don't you know that cooking like this will make the neighbors think we have a housekeeper instead of a mother-in-law?" I froze, my hand trembling as I held the ladle. I was about to reply, but as I looked up, I saw Thomas standing right at the door, having heard everything clearly. Yet, instead of defending me, he just frowned and turned away, leaving me to swallow my tears. Another time, as I had just managed to get the 3 children to sleep, my body still trembling with exhaustion, Rachel opened the bedroom door, looked me up and down, and said directly, "Pathetic. Your whole life, you've only been good at changing diapers. Perhaps God destined you to be a nanny forever." I tried to hold back my tears and quietly said, "Rachel, I am Thomas's mother after all. Isn't it too much for you to say that?" She shrugged, sneering. "Well, it's true. If you were truly valuable, Thomas wouldn't have to do everything himself. You're just good at clinging on to him." Those words struck me like a dagger to the heart. I looked at my son, the man I once trusted implicitly, but Thomas sat there silently, his head bowed over his phone screen, pretending not to hear. That silence hurt me 100 times more. The climax came during a small party at our house. Thomas's and Rachel's friends came to visit, and I was busy preparing food, cleaning, and watching the children. As everyone sat down to eat and drink, Rachel raised her glass and laughed heartily. "We are so lucky. We have a private nanny who doesn't cost us a penny. Evelyn is truly a treasure." The entire table burst into laughter. Standing in the kitchen, my ears burning, my heart aching. But the most painful was the image of Thomas. He was laughing too, a forced laugh, as if agreeing with that cruel joke. That night, I went out to the garden and sat alone in the darkness. Memories of the past flooded back. The image of a young Thomas studying by the oil lamp, his promise, "I'll take care of you when I grow up." All of it seemed to have become a bitter joke. I felt as if I were buried under a mountain of rubble. Every sarcastic remark from Rachel, every silence from Thomas, was another brick pressing down on my chest. I struggled to breathe, tears streaming down my face. But deep inside, a fire began to ignite. I could no longer endure this. Thomas and Rachel's wedding day was supposed to be a happy occasion. I thought that no matter how much I was looked down upon, at least that day I would be able to sit down and watch my son get married with a smile. But reality turned me into the cruelest joke of my life. Right from the morning, Rachel entered my room and threw the old dress she told me to wear. "Keep it simple, Mom. Don't overshadow the bride." I quietly folded it, my heart filled with bitterness. Then, as the guests began to arrive, Rachel leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Oh, one more thing. Mother, please watch the children for us. Thomas and I are busy entertaining guests today and can't be bothered with the little ones." I was stunned. "But today is my son's wedding. I should be—" Rachel cut me off, her eyes sharp. "Want to be a good mother? Then take care of your grandchild." "You don't bother us." And so, for the rest of the day, I was confined to the role of a nanny for all 12 children. They screamed, ran around the hall, some cried for food, some wet my dress, others threw tantrums on the floor. I ran back and forth, one arm holding a baby, the other dragging a toddler, drenched in sweat. Meanwhile, in the distance, Thomas and Rachel laughed heartily, raised their wine glasses, and danced under the dazzling lights. Every time I looked up, my heart ached. I saw my son embrace his wife, radiating happiness without a single glance in my direction. Not a word of inquiry, not a sympathetic look. At one point, I held my crying grandchild, the milk stains on my dress soaked through. A passing guest looked at me with pity and whispered softly, "Who is she? A housekeeper?" I heard every word clearly. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. I wanted to scream, "I'm not a nanny, I'm the groom's mother." But my throat was choked, unable to utter a sound. And then, the most horrific moment arrived. When Thomas stepped onto the podium to give his speech, I thought he would say a few words of thanks. But instead, in the middle of the grand hall, he sneered and said, "If it weren't for my mother, today would undoubtedly have been much more perfect." A dagger, an earthquake. Everything collapsed. Rachel leaned close to the microphone, half joking, half serious. Indeed, if the mother-in-law knew how to keep her distance, we wouldn't have had to deal with so many troubles. Laughter rippled through the crowd, then died down into awkward silence. As for me, my heart shattered. I held my grandchild tightly and stood up. Without a word, I turned and left, under the gaze of hundreds of people. I knew this wasn't just stepping away from a wedding. It was stepping away from years of silence. From that moment on, I vowed never to let myself be looked down upon again. I left the wedding, my heart heavy but my steps firm. Behind me, whispers arose, initially sporadic, then gradually growing into a wave. I caught snippets of conversations. "Is she the groom's mother?" "My God, why would she leave during such an important moment?" "I heard she raised the groom, and yet—" These words were like needles piercing my heart, but at the same time, they were the fire fueling me. I had endured for years, biting my tongue. Now it was enough. I took the children and walked out into the hallway. But before I could get far, I heard someone call out loudly, "Evelyn!" I turned around. It was Linda, the sister of David, my late husband. She rushed over, grabbed my hand, her eyes full of confusion. "If you leave like this, what will people think? And did you hear what Thomas just said?" I pursed my lips, tears welling up. "I heard everything, Linda. He said it himself. In front of so many people, he treated me like a stain, Mrs." Linda squeezed my hand, her voice trembling. "No, Evelyn, you can't stay silent anymore. If you leave, they'll think you're wrong. You have to go back. You have to let everyone see the truth." Her words were like a wake-up call. That's right. If I quietly walked away, I would forever be seen as weak. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and turned back towards the hall. As I entered, the noise immediately died down. All eyes turned towards me. Thomas and Rachel, who were on the stage, instantly froze. I walked straight to the center of the hall, my voice clear and echoing through the room. Thomas, you just said that if it weren't for me, today would have been more perfect. Do you remember who raised you alone, who paid for your education, to get you to this day? Do you remember when your father passed away? I worked tirelessly, starving myself for you. The air seemed to freeze. The guests looked at each other, murmuring. Rachel turned pale, while Thomas stood silently, his eyes darting around, not daring to meet mine. I continued, my words trembling yet firm. You may forget those days, but I won't, and I won't let anyone, including you, trample on my sacrifices in front of everyone. Scattered applause erupted from the back of the hall, gradually growing into widespread approval. I saw a few faces nod, while others sighed. Thomas clutched the microphone, stammering, I didn't mean that, Mother. I was just joking. I looked directly into his eyes, my voice sharp and cold. Some words, Thomas, cannot be considered jokes. The space seemed to explode. Thomas's wedding night, instead of being a perfect celebration, had turned into a stage for a public confrontation right before everyone's eyes. The atmosphere in the hall was thick, as if about to burst. After I spoke, whispers erupted everywhere, quickly dividing into two opposing streams of opinion. A paternal relative, Mr. Henry, David's brother, stood up abruptly, his voice sharp. Thomas, are you insane? Your mother raised you alone, enduring so much hardship for so many years, and today you dare to say that in front of everyone? Many others nodded in agreement. I saw the eyes of a few female relatives in the family light up, and they whispered, Evelyn sacrificed her entire life for Thomas. I still remember the days she worked as a waitress to pay for his tuition. But there were also shakes of the head and mocking voices from Rachel's friend's table. A young woman, likely her close friend, sneered, What era are we in to be counting past sacrifices for a child? Children have a right to live their own lives. This wedding is for the couple. Her causing such a scene is no different from ruining the entire party. Rachel immediately seized on this, her voice shrill, trying to regain control. That's right. We just wanted a perfect day of celebration. But it seems some people prefer to turn it into a personal stage. The whole hall buzzed. Some guests sided with me, while others looked at me with annoyance. I felt like I was standing on a battlefield, where every gaze, every word could be a knife. Thomas stood frozen, sweat beading on his forehead. He held the microphone, stammering, Mom, I didn't mean to, Mom. It's just, sometimes you interfere too much, so I said that. Oh, erupted from the audience. Thomas's words were like pouring oil on the fire. Mr. Henry slammed the table. Interfere! She's your mother! Without her, what would you have to study, to get married, to throw this lavish party? On the other side, Rachel sneered, hugging Thomas's arm, and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. You're right. We need to be clear. We can't let anyone interfere in our married life. I stood amidst the storm of controversy, my heart pounding. But instead of retreating, I took a deep breath and raised my voice clearly. I don't need anyone to be indebted to me. I only need respect. But if today, in front of everyone, my son has forgotten that, then I must speak the truth. The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned towards me. I felt clearly that this time, things would not go back to the way they were. The space grew silent. Only the sound of my heart beating rapidly in my chest remained. I gripped the microphone tightly, my hands trembling, but my voice clear and resounding throughout the hall. Everyone here today knows that since David, my husband, passed away, I have raised Thomas alone. I worked odd jobs, cleaned hotels, washed clothes for people, just so my son could have food, clothing, and a chance to go to school like others. I never asked for anything, never complained. But what was the result? My own son, on his wedding day, treated me like a stain, a burden. Murmurs arose. Some sighed with pity. Rachel's face turned red, and she tried to interrupt. Are you making things up to slander us? No one forced you to do anything. If you did it voluntarily, don't boast about it." I turned, looking directly at Rachel, my eyes cold. "You're right. I did it voluntarily because I thought my son and daughter-in-law would appreciate it. But what did you do? You treated me like a free nanny, made me cancel my doctor's appointments to babysit, and even dared to mock me in front of your friends. Don't say I'm making it up, because many people here have heard you say directly. Thank goodness for Evelyn. Otherwise, I'd go bankrupt hiring a nanny." A few murmurs of confirmation arose. I saw some guests lower their heads, looking embarrassed. Thomas turned pale, stuttering, Mom, stop. This is my wedding." I cut him off, my voice choked but firm. "Precisely because this is your wedding, I have to say it. Because you have forgotten all your promises from the past, you have let your wife disrespect me. Do you remember what you said when you were little, Thomas? I'll take care of you later, I promise. And yet today, you stand before hundreds of people and say that if it weren't for me, this day would have been more perfect." A chorus of, "Oh!" echoed. Many faces shifted from annoyance to indignation as they looked at Thomas. Rachel was about to retort, but Mrs. Linda stood up, slamming her hand on the table. "Enough! Evelyn is telling the truth. I witnessed it all. Her entire life, she only knew how to sacrifice for Thomas. And you, with a little success, turn around and look down on your own flesh and blood. How shameful!" The entire hall was in an uproar. Half applauded in agreement, the other half remained silent, heads bowed. Thomas stood frozen, his face ashen. Rachel gritted her teeth and pulled her husband's arm, but Thomas no longer had the strength to react. I took a breath, placed the microphone on the table, my voice deep but firm. "I did not ruin this wedding. It was your ingratitude and cruelty that did that. From today on, I will no longer remain silent. You want to cut me out of your lives? Fine. But remember, one day the truth will return and strike you down." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving behind a chaotic hall, the rising tide of whispers and eyes fixed on Thomas and Rachel. The wedding night, which should have been the beginning of happiness, became, for them, the first day of a raging storm. After that chaotic wedding night, I knew one thing clearly: only truth and law could protect me. The words spoken in the hall were just the beginning. The real battle would be fought on paper and in court. I began to sort through old documents. In a wooden box hidden at the bottom of a closet, I found the property deed for the house my husband and I bought before he passed away. The papers were clear. The original owner's name was Evelyn and David. But when David passed away, I listened to Thomas and signed some papers that I thought were just temporary transfer procedures for business convenience. I never imagined that my own trembling signature that year would render me with no rights in my own home. I took the file to the lawyer's office. The middle-aged man examined it carefully, then looked up, his eyes sharp and cold. "Mrs. Evelyn, I must be honest. Your son and his wife have quietly transferred ownership. However, according to the law, you have a complete chance to get it back, because there are signs of deception in the transfer process. Are you willing to pursue this lawsuit?" I remained silent for a long time. From the depths of my heart, Thomas's trembling voice on the wedding day echoed, "If it weren't for Mom, today would have been much more perfect." I raised my head, resolute. "Yes, I will pursue the lawsuit. Not just for the house, but because I want them to know that I am no longer a mother who silently endures." In the following days, I quietly gathered evidence. Bank statements showed that the $50,000 I gave Thomas was used to pay for the new villa. I also found a witness, a neighbor who had seen Rachel force me to cancel a doctor's appointment to babysit. Every detail, every piece of the puzzle, gradually came together in my hands. Meanwhile, Thomas and Rachel still thought I had withdrawn after the confrontation at the wedding. They laughed and enjoyed their lives in the luxurious villa. They had no idea that behind their backs, I was preparing a legal counterattack that, once launched, would leave them no time to react. One morning, my lawyer officially filed a motion to freeze the property's assets. As soon as the notification arrived, Thomas frantically called me, his voice panicked. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" "This is my house." I was calm, and for the first time in years, my voice was so cold that I myself didn't recognize it. "No, Thomas, this is your parents' house. And now, it is time for you to return what does not belong to you." News of the villa being sealed off reached Thomas and Rachel faster than I thought. That afternoon, my phone buzzed incessantly. First, it was a call from Thomas. His voice trembled with anger, mixed with panic. "Mother, how could you do this? This is my and Rachel's home. You have no right to destroy it." I replied, my voice calm. "You're right, it is your home. But don't forget, it was built with my sweat, tears, and my last savings. If you have forgotten that, let the court remind you." Thomas was silent for a few seconds, then roared, "This is no longer a family matter. Do you want to drag me to court for the world to laugh at?" I closed my eyes and sighed. Whatever makes people laugh is not my fault. I am merely reclaiming what rightfully belongs to me. That evening, Rachel called. Unlike Thomas, her voice was sickeningly sweet. "Mrs. Evelyn, why must you do this? You live with us, enjoy the comforts of this house, and helping with the grandchildren is beneficial for you. Why make such a scene and lose face?" I gave a dry laugh. "Comforts? I live here, but have no voice, no decision-making power, and am even treated like a servant. That is not a home, Rachel. It is a prison." Rachel's tone changed immediately, becoming sharp and venomous. "Do you think you can win? We have money, lawyers. You are just a useless old woman." I remained calm. Let the court decide. And don't forget, public opinion never sides with the ungrateful. The next day, when the blockade was officially enforced, Thomas called me in despair. He confessed that the bank was pressing for the mortgage payments, and if the house was frozen, they couldn't secure the funds. Rachel flew into a rage, smashing a glass and shouting at her husband, "You are incompetent. Your mother has ruined everything. I married you for peace, not to get involved in this mess." The children in the house cried out, and the magnificent villa suddenly turned into a battlefield. Thomas clutched his head and yelled, "Shut up! If it weren't for your mother, we wouldn't be in this situation." I heard this from a relative who witnessed the scene, and I thought bitterly, so, in the end, he finally told the truth. But it was too late. The first legal blow sent Thomas and Rachel reeling, and I knew this was just the prelude to the financial storm that would sweep away everything they tried to build with greed. The first meeting with the lawyer was scheduled for a Monday morning. I sat at the head of the table with my lawyer beside me, Mr. Martin, a man of vast experience with eyes as sharp as knives. Across from us, Thomas sat huddled, his face gaunt from lack of sleep. And next to him, Rachel wore a stylish dress, but her face clearly showed her anxiety. Their lawyer spoke first, trying to maintain a calm tone. "Mrs. Evelyn, my clients affirm that the transfer of the house was entirely voluntary. You signed the papers, with witnesses. Now you wish to overturn it, which is tantamount to destroying the family's stability." Martin glanced at me, then gave a wry smile. "We have evidence showing that the signature was obtained under unclear circumstances. Ms. Evelyn was not provided with legal counsel and was even subjected to psychological pressure by her own son. This was not a voluntary act, but an abuse of trust." I felt my back straighten. For the first time in years, someone was speaking up for me. Rachel interrupted, her voice sharp. "She can talk about taking care of Thomas, but the law is the law. If she signed, she has to abide by it." "Why is she only bringing this up now?" I looked straight at her, my voice calm but firm. "Because I always believed my son would keep his promise." I remained silent, thinking familial ties would protect me. But today, when even the last shred of respect is gone. I have no reason to endure this any longer." Lawyer Martin then pulled out a document. "This is a bank statement proving Miss Evelyn transferred $50,000 to Thomas. This amount was immediately used to pay the deposit for the villa. If my client had no rights, why would there be such clear transaction records?" Thomas hunched his shoulders, sweat beading on his forehead. Rachel was speechless, her eyes darting around. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Martin continued, "We request the court to freeze the assets and open an investigation into possible fraud during the property transfer. If transparency cannot be proven, the house must be returned to its original owner." The atmosphere was so tense I could hear the clock ticking. Thomas gripped Rachel's hand, whispering in despair, "I told you. Mom had all the proof." Rachel gritted her teeth, her voice a low growl. "Shut up. Don't let her win." I looked at the two of them, no longer angry, only filled with a profound sadness. But that sadness became my strength. Because now I knew I was in a superior position, no longer the one being cornered. The legal counterattack had ignited an irreversible war, and this time I swore I would see it through. When the lawsuit was filed, I thought everything would be handled within the bounds of the law. But I was wrong. In a small town, family matters quickly become topics of gossip for the entire community. And this time, public opinion was not on Thomas and Rachel's side. One morning, I went to the market to buy vegetables. As soon as I reached the entrance, the butcher pulled me aside and whispered, "Evelyn, you are so brave. After raising him your whole life, he's now trying to steal your house. Who could bear that? We are all on your side." I was surprised, and before I could respond, another person chimed in. "We saw everything. On the wedding day, he said that in front of everyone, the whole town heard it. What an unfilial son. And Rachel, heavens, what kind of daughter-in-law has such a venomous tongue?" Within days, the story spread everywhere. Some told it at the coffee shop, others whispered it in the supermarket. Even a local reporter contacted me, asking for an interview. At first I hesitated, but then I thought, the truth needs to be told, so they know I'm not making this up. The article appeared on the front page of the local newspaper with the headline, "65-year-old mother pushed out of home by son after a lifetime of sacrifice. Who is wrong?" A photo of me sitting beside my late husband, holding baby Thomas years ago, was placed next to a picture of Thomas and Rachel at their lavish wedding. The contrast was stark. The article quickly spread on social media, drawing hundreds of indignant comments. "Unfilial son! If it were me, I wouldn't dare show my face to my mother again. Rachel is just the manipulative type, pushing her mother-in-law to the brink. Miss Evelyn is so strong, the whole town needs to stand up for her." While I received support, Thomas and Rachel began to face immense pressure. Friends distanced themselves, and colleagues whispered behind their backs. When Thomas went to work, no one wanted to talk to him. When Rachel went shopping, she encountered scrutinizing glances from neighbors. One evening, I heard from an acquaintance who worked with Thomas. Today, the boss called Thomas into his office and asked directly, "What's going on with your family that the papers are calling you unfilial? The company doesn't want to get involved." Thomas turned pale and couldn't say a word. The pressure of public opinion was like a great storm, engulfing Thomas and Rachel, pushing them to exhaustion. But for me, this wasn't just revenge. It was the justice of the people, something no greedy person could buy. Public pressure mounted, and Thomas became withdrawn like a shadow. But Rachel wouldn't concede defeat easily. She was always arrogant, thinking she could twist words skillfully to reverse the situation. And so, Rachel started spreading false rumors. One morning, neighbors were gossiping with me at the market. "I heard Rachel told her friends that you are greedy and want to take back the house to sell for money. She said you no longer love your children and grandchildren. only thinking of yourself." I was stunned into silence. That was Rachel's typical tactic, turning the victim into the perpetrator. And indeed, some people who didn't know the full story began to doubt. Someone even asked me directly, "Evelyn, are you really suing your son? Isn't that going too far? He's your own flesh and blood." I gritted my teeth and endured, but I wouldn't stay silent. I brought out my bank statements, the documents proving the $50,000 I had given Thomas. I showed them, recounting every detail of the day Rachel made me cancel my doctor's appointment, and every time I had to sit up all night watching the 12 children alone. When the truth was revealed, public opinion swung back in Rachel's favor. An old friend of hers posted on social media, "I attended a party at Thomas's house. I personally heard Rachel say, 'Free nanny, why hire someone?' Does she dare deny it now?" That post went viral, enraging Rachel. She wrote a long status update online, screaming that she was being slandered and that her mother-in-law was fabricating stories to ruin her happiness. But instead of sympathy, she received thousands of angry comments. "What kind of daughter-in-law are you to treat your mother-in-law like a maid? Ms. Evelyn sacrificed her whole life. You can tell she's genuine. You, on the other hand, are just pretending. The more you explain, the more it seems you're in the wrong." The public sarcasm was like salt rubbed into Rachel's fragile pride. I heard that even her close friends began to distance themselves. They didn't want to be dragged into a dirty scandal. Thomas grew increasingly haggard. At work, his colleagues were cold, and at home, Rachel would yell and blame him. The luxurious villa suddenly became a pressure cooker, ready to explode at any moment. One evening, I received a call. Rachel's voice, hoarse with anger. "Are you satisfied now? The whole town is bad-mouthing me. My friends have all abandoned me. But don't think you've won. I'll show everyone your true colors." I simply replied quietly, "Rachel, the truth always shines brighter than any fabrication. The more you resist, the more you reveal who you truly are." Indeed, just a few days later, a recording began circulating online. In it, Rachel harshly scolded Thomas, calling me a freeloader and a burden to endure. The recording was released by one of Rachel's old friends, who was outraged by her malicious attitude. This backlash from public opinion was like a knife turning inward, leaving Rachel with no way out. The recording of Rachel's insults spread like wildfire. In just a few days, it appeared on most of the town's community pages and was shared everywhere. Everyone heard her voice, shrill and venomous. "That old hag just clings to my son. If I'm not careful, she'll be a freeloader for life." Those words were like knives that Rachel plunged into herself. Public opinion, which had already been leaning towards me, now almost completely turned against Thomas and his wife. The media continued to follow the story closely. A local TV channel even produced a short report with the title, "A Mother's Heart Trampled When Ingratitude Becomes Emotional Abuse." In the report, they replayed the scene of me quietly hugging my young grandchild as I left the wedding reception, interspersed with interviews from neighbors. "I know Mrs. Evelyn. She sacrificed her whole life without ever complaining. What Thomas and Rachel did was truly wicked." Viewers cried, others were enraged. On social media, the hashtag #StandWithEvelyn emerged, becoming a trending topic in the community. Hundreds of people left comments of support. "I can't believe a son would insult his mother like that." "Rachel is the kind of toxic daughter-in-law everyone fears." "I hope Mrs. Evelyn wins her case so that justice still exists." When Thomas went to work, his colleagues whispered, "There he is, the guy from the news." If he's ungrateful to his mother, how can he be trusted at work? Rachel had her friends cancel plans, and women's groups in the neighborhood removed her from their activity lists. Even when Rachel went to the supermarket, an elderly woman looked her straight in the face and scolded her. "You ungrateful child, you'll face retribution in this life." Rachel returned home in a state of near madness. She smashed things and yelled at Thomas, "It's all your mother's fault. If it weren't for her, I wouldn't have lost all my dignity like this." Thomas could only remain silent. His face was pale, his eyes vacant. He began to avoid going out, afraid to face anyone. As for me, despite the public support, a deep ache still resided within my heart, because I never wanted to turn my family into a spectacle for the public, but I understood that public opinion was the weapon that would prevent Thomas and Rachel from continuing to disregard me. The legal action had shaken them, and now public opinion had torn away their false facade. Thomas and Rachel no longer had a place in the community, but I knew the real storm was still ahead, in court, where the truth would be revealed not just by emotions, but by law. On the day of the first trial, I walked into the courtroom with my heart pounding. Although I had braced myself mentally, I couldn't help but tremble. The room was vast and deathly silent, with only the heavy sound of footsteps echoing. I sat in the plaintiff's seat, with lawyer Martin beside me. He placed a light hand on my shoulder, reassuring me, "Mrs. Evelyn, you are not alone today. The truth will be on your side." Across from us, Thomas sat with his head bowed, gaunt and disheveled. I caught a glimpse of his hands trembling as he held his file. Rachel was a different story. She wore an expensive suit, her chin held high, her eyes as cold as if to prove she still held the advantage. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The air was so tense I could hear my own breathing. The trial began with the opening statement from lawyer Martin. He spoke calmly, each word firm. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Evelyn, was deceived when she signed the property transfer documents. She was not advised, her rights were not fully explained, and crucially, the transfer occurred while she was dependent on her son and daughter-in-law. This was an act of exploiting trust, a severe violation of my client's rights." He presented bank statements proving that my $50,000 savings had been transferred to Thomas's account and immediately used to pay for the villa. On the large screen in the courtroom, the numbers were clearly displayed. On the other side, Thomas's lawyer attempted to rebut. This was a voluntary contribution. Mrs. Evelyn's son had every right to use the money for personal purposes. Furthermore, the transfer document bears a legal signature, which cannot be denied. Martin immediately retorted, his voice sharp as ice. "But my client signed without knowing the full legal consequences." This was not voluntary, but a carefully laid trap, and we have witnesses to prove the emotional pressure Mrs. Evelyn was subjected to. A murmur ran through the room. I saw Rachel tightly grip Thomas's hand, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. The first witness was called, Mrs. Linda, my husband's sister. She stood at the podium, her voice choked with emotion. I saw how hard Evelyn worked to raise Thomas, and I also saw Rachel repeatedly force her to abandon her own affairs, even her health, just to look after the grandchildren. "I believe Evelyn was not properly informed when she signed the papers. They took advantage of her trust." A rustling sound filled the room. The judge banged his gavel for order, but it was clear the scales were beginning to tip in my favor. I looked at Thomas. He kept his head down, not daring to look up. In that moment, I no longer saw the son who had hugged me and promised, "I'll take care of Mom," but a man consumed by greedy darkness. The trial was far from over, but I knew the winds of justice were beginning to shift, and this time, I would not give up. The trial moved into the cross-examination phase. I sat silently, my hands clasped tightly, while Martin stood tall, his gaze like daggers. The opposing lawyer continued their attack. Mrs. Evelyn lived in that villa, benefiting from its comforts. Yet now she turns around to claim ownership. Isn't that ungrateful behavior towards her own son? Rachel immediately stood up, interjecting, her voice sharp as ice. "That's right. She lived in our home, using electricity and water that we paid for. Without us, she would have had nowhere to go." The audience murmured. I bit my lip, but Martin remained calm, turning to the judge. "May I present further evidence?" He produced a stack of medical bills, the times I had to cancel cardiology appointments to stay home and babysit. Martin pointed directly at them. "Here is clear proof that Mrs. Evelyn did not benefit. On the contrary, she was forced to sacrifice her health to serve this couple. I ask you, is that shelter or blatant exploitation. The chatter intensified. Rachel was momentarily speechless, but then retorted, her voice shrill. "She's lying! I never forced her. Who can prove that?" Immediately, Martin called his second witness, a neighbor, Mr. James. He stood up, his voice deep. "I once heard Rachel herself say, 'I don't care if the old woman is sick, as long as she can still watch the children, make her stay.' I can testify to that." Rachel turned pale, and Thomas began to tremble. He looked around the room, then his gaze instinctively turned to me. For the first time in months, a flicker of shame appeared in his eyes. The judge turned to Thomas, his voice stern. "Mr. Thomas, do you confirm the witness's statement? Was Mrs. Evelyn ever forced to cancel medical appointments because she was looking after the children?" The room fell silent. Thomas pursed his lips, sweat beading on his forehead. A moment of internal struggle played out in his eyes, between family ties and fear of Rachel. Finally, he stammered, "Yes, I knew about it, but I couldn't stop Rachel." A collective "ooh" rippled through the audience. Rachel spun around, her eyes blazing, and shrieked at her husband, "Are you betraying me?" Thomas lowered his head, silent, but his hands trembled uncontrollably. I looked at him, my heart aching, yet with a sliver of relief. At least he still had a shred of conscience. Rachel did not. She threw a tantrum, argued, and tried to turn the tables. "She's old and senile. Who knows if these papers are forged?" Martin immediately retorted, his voice steely. "We have had the signatures verified and the bank statements authenticated. All documents presented here are legitimate. If the defendant continues to fabricate, we will request additional charges of defamation." The atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. I sat there, listening to every word, feeling as if each hammer blow of justice was slowly falling upon Rachel and Thomas. And I knew the true climax was yet to come, when the court delivered its final verdict. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. After Thomas admitted part of the truth, the entire hall erupted in a chaotic murmur, with eyes darting towards Rachel. But she still refused to back down. Rachel sprang up, her voice shrill, almost losing control. "Don't believe him! Thomas is just being manipulated by his mother. She never loved us. She only wants to control and take everything." She pointed directly at me, her eyes flashing with hatred. I looked back, calm, needing no further argument, because I knew that the final words of justice were approaching. The judge signaled for order, then asked Thomas to stand again. "Do you confirm your wife's words? Is it true that Mrs. Evelyn coerced you, wanting to control you?" Thomas trembled. I saw his shoulders shake slightly. He looked at me, his eyes tired, mixed with remorse. After a long, suffocating silence, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "No, Mother never controlled me. On the contrary, I was the one who took advantage of her. I let Rachel push her into the shadows. It was all my fault." The entire courtroom erupted. Some sighed, others murmured, "Finally, he admits it." Rachel went mad. She yanked Thomas's arm, shouting, "You're crazy! How dare you go against me? Without me, you are nothing." The judge banged his gavel forcefully, compelling Rachel to sit down. Her face turned purple, tears streaming down, but she remained stubborn, refusing to admit fault. Finally, the judge's stern voice echoed throughout the room. "After reviewing all the evidence, testimony, and witnesses, the court finds that the property transfer shows signs of fraud and exploitation of trust. The court decrees the villa will be repossessed and returned to the rightful ownership of Mrs. Evelyn. Furthermore, the defendants Rachel and Thomas must repay the $50,000 received, along with legal costs." The gavel struck, sounding like lightning on a clear day. I sat there, tears welling up, not from sadness, but from a sense of release. After years of enduring, justice had finally spoken. Thomas slumped back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. I saw his shoulders shake, unsure if it was from crying or regret. Rachel was screaming, restrained by court officers as she tried to lunge forward in protest. Her eyes met mine, filled with hatred, but I no longer felt fear. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom under everyone's gaze. Many people nodded slightly at me, some even whispered, "Mrs. Evelyn deserves respect." The courthouse doors closed behind me, and I looked up at the gray sky. A light rain began to fall, cool on my skin. For the first time in years, I felt relieved, as if a 1,000-pound burden had been lifted from my shoulders. Justice belonged to me. But I also knew this was not the end. Because after this verdict, the lives of Thomas and Rachel would turn towards a dark path they themselves had chosen. Following the court's verdict, the lives of Thomas and Rachel plummeted like dry leaves in a storm. News of the lawsuit spread everywhere, not just within the town but beyond. An article with the bold headline, "Mother Wins Lawsuit, Regains Justice After Years of Exploitation by Her Own Son," was widely shared. Thomas's name became a symbol of filial impiety, while Rachel was branded the wicked daughter-in-law. The day I moved out of the villa, the neighbors lined both sides of the street. No one looked at Rachel with any favor anymore. I clearly heard the whispers, "See, karma arrived quickly." Mrs. Evelyn suffered all her life, and finally, her name has been cleared. Rachel emerged, her face stern, but unable to hide her humiliation. She tried to maintain a proud facade, but the scornful laughter and contemptuous glances from those around her were like daggers piercing her back. Thomas walked silently behind, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped as if carrying a mountain. And Thomas's company did not tolerate an employee mired in serious scandal. Just a week later, he was fired. The reason stated, negative impact on the company's image. Thomas, once the pride of the workplace, became a discarded failure. Rachel fared no better. Women's groups in the neighborhood unanimously removed her from their lists. Friends gradually cut off contact, unfriending her on social media. Once, Rachel even walked into her usual coffee shop, and the server turned away, pretending not to see her. Being shunned, being isolated, things she never thought would happen to her. The pressure of public opinion weighed heavily. Online, a torrent of harsh comments was directed straight at them. Those who act immorally lose everything. No amount of money can salvage honor. The more people loved Mrs. Evelyn, the more they hated this couple. Those words struck Rachel like lashes. She began to fly into a rage, taking her anger out on Thomas. Every night, the sound of arguments echoed from the temporary house they rented after leaving the villa. The neighbors recalled, Rachel would scream until her voice was hoarse, while Thomas just endured in silence. Once, we heard the sound of furniture shattering. For me, it was not joy, but a quiet release. I did not gloat at my son's downfall, but I knew this was the price he had to pay for his ingratitude. And the most cruel part was this. No one saw Thomas as a successful man, a filial son anymore. In the eyes of the world, he was just the one who betrayed his own mother. A legal verdict had reclaimed the house for me, but the verdict of public opinion had turned Thomas and Rachel's lives into a bottomless abyss. After losing their home and jobs, Thomas and Rachel had to move into a small, dilapidated apartment on the outskirts. From a magnificent villa with a garden and swimming pool, they fell to a cramped room with peeling walls and a floor that creaked with every step. In the beginning, Rachel tried to appear strong, but the humiliation from public opinion gradually made her lose control. Close friends, the same ones who had cheered for the perfect couple at their wedding, now avoided them like a plague. Text messages went unanswered, and calls were not picked up. On social media, every photo Rachel had posted showing off designer bags and luxury cars was dug up by netizens, accompanied by sarcastic comments. "Are you still showing off now?" Dare to take smiling photos after robbing your own mother. I really don't understand how I used to admire her. Each time she read them, Rachel would scream and throw her phone on the ground. She began to take her anger out on Thomas, her voice full of resentment. You are useless. If you hadn't confessed in court, we wouldn't have lost everything like this. Thomas remained silent, but his silence only made Rachel more furious. They argued almost every day. The new neighbors reported that not a single night passed in their apartment without noise, sometimes the crying of children, sometimes the clatter of breaking dishes. Meanwhile, relatives also began to turn their backs. Uncle Henry, David's brother, had bluntly said at a family gathering, Thomas, I no longer consider you my nephew. Those who turn their backs on their mother will turn their backs on anyone. Don't come looking for me for help from now on. Other relatives were also distant, no one wanting to help. Whenever Thomas called, they would just murmur and hang up. Rachel grew increasingly venomous. See? Not just your mother. Even your whole family hates you. I told you, marrying you was the biggest mistake of my life. Thomas grew more and more haggard. Having lost his job, and with no one willing to hire him due to the stigma of being unfilial, he could only find odd jobs with meager pay. Once he walked with a swagger in an expensive suit. Now Thomas was just a gaunt man in a rumpled shirt with dark circles under his eyes. The most painful thing was that the children also sensed the change. They whispered among themselves, and one even asked directly, Dad, why does everyone say you don't love Grandma? Thomas heard this, his heart aching as if cut by a knife, but he couldn't answer. He could only hold his child close, his eyes red-rimmed. Rachel had lost all patience with the children. She would snap at them, yell at them, and even leave them crying to go out alone. The entire house felt stifling like a cage, where even a sigh could ignite an argument. From the pinnacle of grandeur, Thomas and Rachel had fallen to the bottom of society. And the most bitter part was that their relatives and friends, who once praised them, were now the ones who turned their backs the fastest. They once thought they could live forever behind a facade of luxury, but public opinion and the truth had stripped it all bare, leaving only a fractured family, crumbling day by day. In the following months, Thomas and Rachel's lives spiraled downwards uncontrollably. If they once entered ballrooms under blinding flashbulbs, they now received only contemptuous glances when they went out. Thomas knocked on doors from one company to another, but as soon as his resume was submitted, employers would shake their heads upon reading his name. The notorious reputation of the unfilial son who sued his mother was stamped on his back. No one wanted to hire someone hated by public opinion, not even for manual labor. Rachel fared even worse. She was used to expensive dresses and luxurious spas, but now had to budget every penny for rice. But instead of changing, Rachel poured all her resentment onto her husband and children. Every evening, shouts would echo in their cramped apartment. You are so useless. Without me, you'd be nothing. These kids are as annoying as that old woman, always clinging to us. The neighbors were so used to the sounds that they could only sigh. No one wanted to interfere, but everyone knew this family was breaking apart. The children, 12 of them, once innocent, were now caught in the vortex. They went to school and were teased by their friends. Your dad is an unfilial person. Your mom is hated by the whole town. The older ones would fight out of frustration, while the younger ones would cry until their eyes swelled. Thomas hugged his child, his voice choked. I'm sorry. I was wrong. But apologies were not enough to erase the fear and disappointment in the children's eyes. Friends turned away, relatives abandoned them, and the community scorned them. The nest, once built on pretense and greed, was now just 4 cracked walls. Rachel couldn't stand the confinement and would leave for days at a time, leaving Thomas to struggle with the young children. Once she even threw her wedding ring on the floor and shouted, I regret marrying you. My whole life has been ruined by your family. Thomas just sat there blankly, watching the ring roll on the floor. He no longer resisted, no longer argued, just silently endured, like someone who had lost everything. From a man who once held his head high, Thomas had become a wandering specter. Every time I accidentally heard news, my heart ached. I felt no schadenfreude. After all, he was still my son. But I understood this was the price of unfiliality and greed, living in isolation, losing all honor, and a shattered family. Finally, Rachel packed her belongings and left. No goodbyes, no backward glances. Only a messy house and crying children were left behind. Thomas sat slumped on the floor, hands covering his head, in despair. That image spread through a candid photograph. Thomas collapsed outside a dilapidated apartment, surrounded by his young, whimpering children. The photo quickly became a bitter symbol. The man who once had everything, now lost it all due to his own ingratitude. It was a tragically fitting end for one who dared to turn his back on the mother who sacrificed her entire life for him. After Rachel left, the small apartment became even more desolate. Thomas sat dazed for hours by the window, staring out at the bleak street, the impoverished children crying around him. Shoulders once confident, once proud, now hunched and trembling like a sinner's. That night, after coaxing the children to sleep, Thomas sat alone in the darkness. On the table lay an old phone, its screen brightly lit with a familiar contact. Mom. His fingers trembled as he moved towards the call button, then hesitated. So many times he pressed, so many times he stopped. Old memories echoed in his mind. When he was a child, whenever he was scared, Thomas only needed to call out, "Mom!" and I would rush to hug him tightly. Now, he wanted to call out that same word. But would I still open my arms to welcome him? Finally, he took a deep breath and pressed the call button. The phone rang, long, then stopped. No one answered. Thomas gasped, sweat beading on his forehead. He tried calling again, this time met with only the same hopeless ringing. Each ring felt like a knife cutting into his heart. He collapsed onto the table, hands over his head, sobbing like a child. The next day, he wrote a long message. "Mom, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was blind. I let Rachel change me. Please forgive me. Give me another chance to be your son again." But the message was never answered. I read it, but I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because I was too tired to believe one more time. Thomas began to spiral into torment. By day, he struggled with manual labor to provide for his children. By night, when everything fell silent, he confronted himself. The image of me leaving amidst the wedding, the image of me standing in court with determined eyes, the words he once said. All of it came crashing down, haunting him in his sleep. One night, neighbors heard a blood-curdling scream. They rushed over and found Thomas huddled in a corner of the room, drenched in sweat, his eyes red-rimmed. "Don't go, Mom! Don't leave me! Mom!" But when he woke, the room was still empty. Only the children looked at their father, who seemed no longer himself, with confused eyes. That was the beginning of a period of belated regret that Thomas couldn't escape. In the following days, Thomas lived like a lost soul. By day, he worked as a loader at a warehouse, and at night, he lay sprawled on the floor, his eyes vacant. But even when exhausted, he couldn't sleep peacefully. As soon as he closed his eyes, nightmares would come. In his dreams he saw me, an old frail mother, sitting and crying alone in the dilapidated house. He would run towards me, but each time he almost reached me, the image would dissolve, leaving only my choked sobs. "You said you would take care of me, but what have you done?" Thomas would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding wildly. He would jump up, trembling, and reach for his phone. Once again, he called me. The phone rang, long, but still no reply. He left a voice message, his voice choked with emotion. "Mom, I know I was wrong. Please answer me. Just once more. I'm begging you." But the next morning, his phone remained silent. No messages, no missed calls. That silence was heavier than any reproach. It left Thomas sitting stunned for hours, his eyes vacant. Another time, he wrote a handwritten letter. His handwriting was messy, trembling. "Mom, I remember when you carried me to school in the rain when I was little. I remember the meals where you gave me your share. I've forgotten everything, and now, on this day, I've hurt you. I'm not asking you to forget, only for a chance to make amends." He mailed the letter. He waited for a reply every day, his heart leaping every time he heard the mail carrier's vehicle stop at his door. But then, week after week, no letter came back. The children began to notice their father was different. The older ones whispered among themselves, "Dad cries alone. He misses Grandma, doesn't he?" Thomas didn't answer, only held his children close, tears falling silently. In their eyes, he was no longer a strong father, but merely a man consumed by the darkness of regret, day by day. One night, the neighbors heard a cry again. "I was wrong, Mom. Don't leave me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." That sound sent shivers through the entire neighborhood. People said to each other, "See, karma. Those who are unfilial can never hold their heads up in life." Thomas knew people looked down on him, but his mother's silence was what slowly killed him. He tried to contact her again, but each time, only the cold ringing of the phone answered. And he understood, perhaps for the rest of his life, he would never hear his mother's reply again. As time passed, Thomas gradually became a shadow of his former self. The man who was once arrogant was now just a gaunt figure with dark circles under his eyes and a hollow face. Neighbors saw him shuffling to work in tattered clothes, shaking their heads in pity. But what tormented Thomas most was not his poverty, but the constant nightmares. Every night, he dreamed of me standing in the darkness, my eyes full of disappointment, turning away silently. He would rush towards me shouting, "Mom, don't go. Give me a chance." But in the dream, I would only walk further away, leaving behind a cold echo. "You had your chance, but you threw it away." Thomas would jolt awake, his heart pounding, his throat constricted. He would sob like a child, clutching a tattered pillow, calling out in despair, "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Day after day, he tried to contact me again, but my phone never picked up. Messages sent would forever show, "delivered," never a reply. Each lonely ring was another dagger twisting in his heart. Once, Thomas went to the old house, where I was living after reclaiming ownership. He stood outside the gate, looking in, his hand trembling as he rested it on the door. Inside, the warm yellow light spilled out, and he could hear me laughing and talking with neighbors. But Thomas didn't dare knock. He was afraid that if he opened his eyes, they would only hold absolute coldness. He turned away silently, his shoulders slumped, his figure gradually disappearing into the night. Regret gnawed at him from the inside out. Friends were gone, his career in ruins, his wife left, his young child neglected, his reputation in tatters. But what hurt him the most was that no matter how much he cried or how hoarsely he screamed, the chance to make amends to his mother was gone forever. Thomas realized he would have to live his entire life with the stain of unfilial conduct, trapped in inescapable nightmares, a sentence with no parole date, and that was the harshest punishment fate had in store for him. After the trial and all the turmoil, my life gradually returned to peace. I returned to the old house, the place that once held so many memories of my husband and Thomas's childhood. For the first time in years, I sat on the old wooden chair in the garden, breathing in the morning air without the worry of a child crying or someone shouting. Neighbors visited often, bringing baskets of vegetables and fruit. Everyone congratulated me. Everyone said, "Mrs. Evelyn deserves to rest and be happy." I just smiled gently, but felt a spreading sense of relief within my heart. No longer having to force myself to be a nanny, no longer fearing being looked down upon, I clearly felt that I had regained my self-worth and my voice. One afternoon, I decided to join the church's charity club in town. I had wanted to for a long time, but before, I was forced to confine myself to the whirlpool of Thomas and Rachel. Now, I was free. I went with other women, cooking meals for charity, distributing clothes to the homeless, and talking with lonely people. As I handed a bowl of hot soup to an elderly homeless woman, she grasped my hand tightly, her eyes welling up. "Thank you. You are so kind." At that moment, my heart felt warmer than ever before. It turned out that happiness doesn't come from the acknowledgement of an ungrateful child, but from giving love and receiving genuine appreciation in return. I started writing a journal, recording each day, each emotion. I wanted to preserve it as a reminder. Once I had stood up, I would never return to a life of being disrespected. Every evening, I lit a candle by David's portrait. I whispered, "Do you see? I've defended my dignity. I'm no longer treated like a shadow. You can rest easy." In the old house, laughter echoed again. No longer forced laughter to hide the pain, but genuine laughter from a liberated heart. It was the beginning of a new journey, a journey of peace, freedom, and self-respect. The more I became involved in volunteer activities, the more I felt reborn. Every morning, I woke up earlier, put on a simple woolen sweater, prepared a basket of bread and bottles of water, and went with the sisters from the group to distribute them to the homeless at the train station. People affectionately called me kind Mrs. Evelyn. The children in the neighborhood ran up, chattering, "Tell us a story, Grandma. Tell us about Uncle Thomas's childhood." I smiled, stroked their heads, but this time I didn't tell the story to complain, but to remind them a mother's love should never be taken for granted. I spoke calmly, and in the children's eyes, I saw genuine attentiveness. One evening, the church held a Thanksgiving service for the elderly women who had contributed to the community. I was unexpectedly called to the stage. As I walked onto the podium, the entire audience stood up and applauded. My eyes welled up, but my heart was alight. After years of suffering, today I received recognition, not from the disloyal child of my own, but from the community, from people who could see my true value. After the ceremony, an orphaned girl came up and hugged me, whispering, "Mrs. Evelyn, I wish I had a mother like you." I held the girl's hand tightly, my voice choked with emotion. Those innocent words healed the wounds within me. I realized that motherhood is not confined to blood ties. A true family is those who respect and love me. My life is not wealthy, but my heart is at peace. Every day I have work to do, people to share with. I am learning to love myself again, taking care of my health, joining yoga classes for the elderly. With every movement, every breath, I feel my body growing stronger again, both physically and mentally. The neighbors often said, "Mrs. Evelyn looks 10 years younger. She always looked so gaunt before, but now she's radiant." I smiled, and this time the smile was no longer bitter. I have weathered the storm to find the dawn of my own life. I don't need a big house, a fancy car, or false adulation. I only need a warm home, a genuine community, and a free heart. And finally, I have it all. One late autumn afternoon, I sat in my garden, fallen yellow leaves scattering around the porch. On the table was a hot cup of tea and a half-finished diary. I wrote the final lines about my journey. I once thought family meant blood relatives, an unchangeable bond, but after everything, I realized a true family is not where you share blood, but where you find respect and love. Without those two things, even biological children become strangers. I looked up and saw the neighborhood children excitedly running in, holding baskets of freshly picked oranges. They laughed and called to me, Mrs. Evelyn, please continue the story. I chuckled, my heart warm. In that moment, I knew I was no longer alone. I had lost a biological child, but I had gained a community, a place where I was called by a loving name, the mother of the neighborhood. I looked at the fiery red sky at sunset, whispering to myself, I have come full circle through the storm to find myself again. And the most important thing I learned is, happiness is not found in empty promises or false glamour. Happiness is when we can be ourselves, live in freedom, and be respected by those who are worthy. My story is not one of resentment, but a reminder to all, never take motherhood lightly. Once lost, there is no chance to make amends. If you are reading this, remember, cherish the one who raised you. Love your family with all your heart. And if you have ever been devalued, stand up. Justice, though delayed, will come to those who dare to defend themselves. I closed my diary, smiling. My painful journey had ended, but a new, peaceful life was just beginning. And for you, the one listening to this story, please subscribe and follow, because the next story I tell will be even more surprising and touch your heart even deeper.